Please welcome Regional President for Detroit and Southeast Michigan for PNC Financial Services Group, Richard DeVore. President and Chief Executive Officer of the Kresge Foundation, Rip Rapson. President and Chief Executive Officer of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, Lejeune Montgomery Tabron. Superintendent of the Detroit Public Schools Community District, Nikolai Vitti. And to moderate the discussion, Director of Arts and Culture for the City of Detroit, Rochelle Riley.
Good morning.
Good morning.
For the first time in 15 years, I'm not the media. We are fooling ourselves. Our leaders of industry and business, most of them, come to this island and discuss the problems of the day. And then we return to Detroit to work on them, all except one, education. We have tried things. Governor Snyder did, Governor Whitmer will, and things are happening, which you'll hear about. But we won't do what is necessary. That means we have to stop treating education like it's us versus them, districts versus leaders, and teachers versus everybody. So when you watch the news and see crime and high unemployment and companies like Amazon deciding not to build a headquarters here, don't fool yourself into thinking it is because our urban centers are run by gangs and because we do not have a transportation system. Amazon didn't come here, and every single problem we have in Detroit and regional Detroit can be traced back to the fact that we don't care enough about our children. Rather than raising them to be senators and scientists, we are leading some to be gangbangers and criminals. And they are not all black kids. Don't fool yourself. And they're not all from Detroit and Pontiac and other urban centers. Don't fool yourself. So until you, many of our best and brightest, decide that we will not go further without fixing the schools, we will continue to have the annual wringing of hands over what the education system lacks, and we will not remember that the children that we refuse to properly educate become the adults that we don't want to live beside, and they are not all black. Pick any child in Detroit. If that child was a friend of your child, would you want them to go to schools without heat, try to learn without books, and sit all day with empty stomachs? You know you wouldn't. So today we're going to talk about how to fix the damn schools. Or at least recognize what it takes to try. There is no such thing as fake news. No such thing. But there is such a thing as a fake conversation. So the conversations, and I'm so grateful to the Chamber for having them, are going to be real from now on. So we're going to start with this amazing panel, and we're going to talk about something fantastic called hope. Research has shown that if we don't start supporting our children holistically at an early age, both academic and non-academic gaps between underdeserved children and their wealthier peers widen exponentially. So I want to start with Rip, who with the Kresge Foundation has always worked miracles, and Lejeune, who with the Kellogg Foundation has always worked miracles, and say, let's talk a little bit about Hope Starts Here, that process on K-3 alignment and why it's such a key focus for this successful effort. Rip?
I always defer to Lejeune.
Lejeune?
I love the word hope. And Hope Starts Here talks about providing hope for young children. But I want you all to know that we're not just working from a place of hope. We're working from a place of strategy. We're working from a place of knowledge. And it has been very much concentrated and focused in community. And as I think about what we're doing with Hope Starts Here, I want you all to know this isn't something brand new. It is something that is being grounded in best practice. The Kellogg Foundation in the early 2000s funded work in securing children to be ready for kindergarten, looking at systems between early childhood development and that transition into kindergarten, and invested greatly across the nation to make sure that those systems work for young people. And there was a lot of evidence produced there. There were learnings that was produced in that work. And that work is live and well now, right here in the city of Detroit, and could be across the state of Michigan. And it is about being very intentional and putting children first. And that's what Hope Starts Here is all about. And when Rip came to me and said, Lejeune, let's partner and do this for the city of Detroit. And we know we're not starting from nothing. We're starting with knowledge and best practice. And so we're building on that. And the Hope Starts Here work, I think, is very much grounded in a community-driven effort. It involved over 80,000 actually, people we reached out to talk about what they wanted for their children in the city of Detroit. And we built this framework from their insights and their needs and for the children. So I'll let Rip continue to talk about this, but I want you all to know that this framework works. If we take it seriously, it is grounded, and there are many states who have already taken it seriously. And as I look at the list of some of the best public education in the nation, those states that started over decades ago working in this space around early childhood and connecting it to K-12 are now at the top of the highest performing schools in this nation. So this can be done, and I'm just glad that we're doing it in Michigan and in Detroit.
And I'm supposed to say now what?
You let me go first.
But Rip, I will make it a little easier for you, because I don't know that everybody knew about this community engagement, where you start with 18,000 people that got up to 80,000 people to develop an actual program. I mean, literally a framework with a set of principles and priorities, which we sometimes don't remember. Right. And there are 15 strategies and 6 imperatives. There's a whole, I mean, literally, this is the plan. So if you could talk a little bit about the plan.
Well, just a couple of things. My sense is that Rochelle's sense of outrage and urgency is actually what motivated us to come together. And since Kellogg and Kresge have come together, we've been joined by PNC, by the Fisher Family Foundation, by a lot of other folks who I think have just finally said, we've talked about this for years and years. We've done good work here, there. People on the ground, as Lejeune suggested, have been doing heroic work for years. But when are we really going to put a stake in the ground? And I think what came out of the community conversations, Rochelle, was a very clear sense of what people wanted, what people needed, and what we could do. One is that people needed help keeping their facilities up. Often they just can't pay for basic rain damage or new books or new equipment of one kind or another. People needed teacher training. They needed the ability to have some professional training that would help them move to the next level. People wanted to create a network among themselves to compare notes and figure out how they could work better. People needed more funding. For sure, they needed more funding. And so out of this community engagement process was more than, as Lejeune said, more than sort of a sense of aspiration and frustration. It was a, what can we do in the next 6 months, in the next year, in the next 2 years that we can actually track and direct in ways that get us really moving in the right direction. And I think, if anything, Hope Starts Here is a very concrete, practical sense of what happens when a community collectively sets some priorities, funds them adequately, resources them in all sorts of other ways, and really moves off the ball. And I think that folks in this room should come back every year and hold our feet to the fire and saying, how many new facilities have been improved? How many new kids are moving through? How many teacher and resource education sessions have you had? I mean, it's time to sort of stop talking and move on. And I think that's really what this initiative represents.
You know, Rochelle, this is what attracted us, this process. Not being prescriptive, top down, but rather ground up. We know that other process does not work. And I think it really gives this process, while it was laborious, really, I think, is attracting more people to the table.
And that's what I love about any effort where you're not working for people or talking to people, but working with people and talking with people about what they need. And no one knows the need more than you, Dr. Vitti. As the leader of the Detroit Public Schools Community District, How do school districts work with foundations and with the community? What's that key role to make sure that K through 12 and early childhood are aligned?
I think the key is intentionality. We can't just do things for the sake of doing them. We can't just work with children because we love children. I mean, that should be a motivation, but you have to be strategic and intentional with what you're actually doing. When we look at children that enter DPSCD in kindergarten, only 1% of children starting in kindergarten are at middle to end of kindergarten readiness. And so you may say, well, they're coming into kindergarten. You wouldn't expect them to be at mid or end of year readiness. But the reality outside of Detroit, that number is much higher. So when we talk about how many children are at grade level in third grade, we have to realize that that challenge doesn't begin in third grade. That challenge is beginning much before that. So when we talk about intentionality, that has to be a focus on curriculum. So we have a set of standards in reading and math starting in kindergarten, but we have to be intentional starting in pre-K and early learning with building the skill sets that allow students to scaffold and be ready by kindergarten for what they should be exposed to. We have to be more intentional about teacher quality or just instructional quality. We can't just be satisfied with the child being supervised before in the pre-K space. They have to be educated. This cannot be babysitting. We have to actually be intentional about teaching letters, sounds, colors, numbers, numerical sense, creative thinking, innovative thinking, working in small groups, building social skills. And it can't just be the social skills component. It has to be more academically driven. And so the opportunity is about alignment. I think more conversations need to happen around what curriculum is the right curriculum, more diagnostic conversations around what are the gaps academically that we're seeing in kindergarten, being more intentional about teacher quality. We say teacher training, but moving more toward certification. Identifying children with special needs earlier in the learning continuum and sharing that data to the kindergarten level and to the school district level so we don't lose what we gain through the early learning experience. And lastly, I would say districts have to become more intentional about how we group children. And what I mean by that is when students start in kindergarten, we think of all children homogeneously the same. And so we're not building off of the investment that occurred in the early learning opportunity, where if children enter kindergarten and they're at mid-level kindergarten, for example, then we have to group them appropriately so that we can build off of their learning and they're not regressing based on what was gained previously. And I don't think school districts are being intentional enough about that.
I can tell you my touchstone for keeping up with what was happening in schools was a teacher that I used to call all the time, just how are things going, what's going on, and she'd be so frustrated because she would have a new class to come in, 45 kids, 19 different reading levels.
Right.
And you can't succeed with that. So much of that has to happen as a part of a framework, and like you said, intentional. I want to ask, I said I wasn't going to ask this, but I do want to ask.
Yeah. Terrific.
How important is it that kindergarten is not mandatory in the state of Michigan? There are only a little over a dozen states around the country that require it. Or maybe, no, there's closer to 2 dozen, but only a dozen require all-day kindergarten, which means you have a lot of kids who may do some K through 3 really important intentional learning, but the ones who aren't in kindergarten may not be a part of that, and the ones who are going to first grade without being able to write their names, you've got to work with that. Can you talk a little bit about that, all of you?
I'm sure.
I'm not suggesting that you have to do that now.
I am supportive of mandatory kindergarten, but I do believe that there needs to be a runway before it's implemented. Our parents have to be informed in advance. They have to know the rationale behind it, the benefit of it, and that there is at least a year of transition so parents can be aware and they're aware of the consequences, because when we make those decisions without the communication piece, then all we're doing is penalizing parents for what they don't know, not that what they don't value, but often what they don't know. So I would be supportive, but with some type of a year of transition and announcing that this is going to be the expectation, because it can move into a more penalized scenario, sanctioned scenario with our parents, and there's enough in parents' lives right now that is distracting them and and frustrating them. We don't want to layer that, but at the same time, if we're going to invest in kindergarten, we know the importance of kindergarten, then it should be required to set that expectation early rather than wait to first grade for that to happen.
That makes sense.
So I have a non-expert opinion on this. I'm not Dr. Vitti, but not only do I believe in mandatory kindergarten, I think we have to invest in our young people before kindergarten. We should be investing in pre-K and universal pre-K and spaces where all of our children are learning. When I look at the cost of daycare for parents, when we talk about needs of parents, daycare average cost is $10,000 a year. And you know, most of our families in Detroit are making, you know, less than the poverty level. That's half of their entire salary. So what we really have to do is believe in education as the driver for improving one generation over another, and then investing in education from the very beginning of the child. And that's all of us investing, but also our state resources have to be prioritized to educate our workforce of the future. And we're not doing that. And one of the benefits we have at the Kellogg Foundation of working across the nation, one of the places that we also call a priority place is Mississippi. And when I mentioned earlier that we had an effort of Spark and really thinking about early childhood education and how you invest in children, we had actually 5 states that started. Arizona, Connecticut, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And the 5th was Mississippi. 4 of those states invested in that process. Mississippi did not. Where do you find Mississippi? Now down close to Michigan. States that do not invest in their young people from the very early point of investment.
Well, it just,
Got to stop going after.
yeah, I was going to say.
Just saying.
You could do something about that.
I'm mad, bro.
Yeah. Well, and you should be. I mean, I was in a hall conversation earlier today, and one of the radio interviewers was saying, you know, why do we find K-12 so difficult? You know, aren't there ways that we can crack that nut? And Dr. Vitti will tell us what those ways are. But my sense is that the K-12 system is unbelievably complicated for multiple reasons. But one of the reasons it's complicated is that because kids really are showing up unprepared to enter school. And so if we know anything, we know that one possible avenue for success is exactly what Lejeune just described. And it becomes a question, when you think about it, that's sort of backwards. If we know it works and we continue to complain about the backside poor outcomes, why wouldn't we invest? We're just not willing to. How much, in what, over what length of time, how far down the age spectrum, those are all legitimate policy questions. And I think the state of Michigan has begun sort of making those investments in a more systematic, reasonable way. But for our money, I think, I'll speak for Kresge, not for the rest of the folks on the stage. We actually are going to double down on these years. It's something we can do. We know the system can be sort of gathered together. We know who the providers are. We know who the kids are. We know what the system is. We know how to come at it through various portals of success. And I think, you know, as a community, we just have to do that community by community by community. What we do in Detroit can't tell us what we do in Grand Rapids, can't tell us what we do in Lansing, but we got to start. And so we're going to start in Detroit. We're going to do the best we can here and hope that that then migrates to other communities as well.
Now, you talk about this like it's a pilot program and how it can spread. Perhaps, I don't want to go too far, but there are some things that have been happening, and I know that because I'm so angry, it may seem like I don't notice some of the things that are happening. So I do want to talk a little bit with you, Dr. Vitti, about the Northwest Detroit effort to create a cradle to career campus, because that's what you have to do. I mean, sometimes people use the phrase right to life for the wrong reasons, but if children don't have a right to healthy lives, we're not creating a path for them to be successful adults, and then we complain about how they are as adults. So let's talk about that whole lifelong learning thing.
So very excited, and it started with Kresge. At the Marygrove campus in Detroit, it is a campus that has struggled with enrollment for undergraduate and graduate students. Lots of conversations about what to do with that space, the campus, the land, and Kresge said it should continue, and so did the Sisters linked to Marygrove, that it should continue as an educational campus. And there was lots of conversation, private school, charter school, and Kresge said it would be a K-12 school, and it would partner with DPSCD. So we are on the verge of creating a early learning, a pre-K to 20 continuum in partnership with Starfish, who will do the early learning component. We will do the K-12 component, and then we will also be partnering with the University of Michigan for the college component. But students will start at Starfish. There'll be new facilities on the campus, so research-based curriculum, research-based teacher training, and those children will then move into the K space on the Marygrove campus through DPSCD. The focus of the school will be engineering, but with a social justice lens, and we'll be partnering with the University of Michigan on the engineering component, the social justice component. But what's also exciting about the Marygrove initiative is we're going to be very intentional about teacher development and teacher training through the University of Michigan. So we have picked, it was a very rigorous process to just be a teacher at Marygrove, but we will be using master teachers through the school district and professors at University of Michigan to train undergraduates and graduates that want to become teachers on the Marygrove campus. And as they learn to be teachers, they'll either work at Marygrove or work in other DPSCD schools. So we'll be creating a pipeline of future teachers that are well trained and supported based on a residency model. You know, in order to become a doctor, you have to shadow a doctor. You have to learn how to become a doctor before you're actually practicing. And you have the right guidance and mentoring. We're going to do the same with our teachers to build that kind of support into the future. So it's an exciting initiative, but one where you'll see the continuum of partnership, of conversation, of collaboration on materials, teacher training. And we believe that in the years to come, we will show clearly that with the right kind of investment over time and the continuity of that investment, that students will reach their potential by the time they get to that 12th grade level and move into college. So that's the initiative in a nutshell. And I would also add to what was already stated, aside from the intentionality around curriculum, if we're serious about children reaching their potential, we have to provide the right wraparound services at the very early grade levels as well. It is about being intentional around curriculum and teacher quality, but it's also the wraparound services linked to medical support, dental support, mental health. These issues become apparent very early in a child's life. And what I said in Mackinac, I'll say again in a different way. If it's all right for middle-class students to have certain wraparound services that are a natural part of their socioeconomic background, why do we sometimes have these debates and conversation whether a child in poverty shouldn't have the same thing? And then we wonder why they're not reaching their talent by the end of 12th grade. It's not actually that hard to understand why that's not happening, because they're not receiving the same kind of resources and support all the way through. So as we begin to invest in early learning, and that continues in the K-12 space, we have to be intentional around the wraparound services as well at the early grade levels and intervention.
Rochelle, you know, we have 23 partners in Metropolitan Detroit in our Grow Up Great program, and the consistent theme we hear over and over is professional development for our teachers. And I think it's a little bit misunderstood, but there is kind of a tsunami coming of shortage of teachers. And we all know all the reasons why. Start with pay, but a lot of different reasons. But this professional development that Dr. Vitti's talking about is so important, and it's different things in different areas, right? It could be different in Brightmoor than it could be in Southwest Detroit, but PD is, I think, really, really important in all these kinds of programs. So that's another reason why we were attracted to this model.
Well, I can tell you I have never understood, and I do like tradition, but this cleaving to tradition when we know that things change, social change, educational change. We want the schools to be the same as they were in the 40s and 50s when that is absolutely not where we're living. So how is it possible? I mean, you guys literally are the leaders of this new, you are the formation now. So how do we get people to understand, A, the schools have to be different entities, and B, the teachers have to be different soldiers? That means you have to make master teachers and you have to pay them what they're worth. We're pretty soon not going to have any teachers because nobody's going to want to do it. They're not going to want to do it for the amount of money that they do. I wouldn't. I love teachers. Y'all are awesome. But I would never. I mean, first of all, I would hate that responsibility because you're responsible for human beings and who they're going to be. How do we get people, the legislature, I don't mean to say it in that tone of voice, the legislature and business leaders and people to understand that these are sea changes that have to happen? Is that something that the hope paradigm can also, can that shift that paradigm?
I hope so. And I think part of the ecosystem for that conversation is also higher education. And we've had many conversations with higher education, and I think some are beginning to step up. You know, the University of Michigan model that Dr. Vitti described, I think, is excellent. Grand Valley State is doing the exact same thing in Battle Creek for partnering with the public school system. But if we can get higher education and those departments of education to be agile in their methodology and include things like cultural competency and racial equity and you know, how to, you know, understand adverse childhood experiences and trauma-informed care. Those things are a part of the higher ed curriculum that needs to be strengthened. And so I think those are the partnerships that we need to form as we think about that ecosystem so that we can get the best, you know, faculty and practitioners to research and then shift, and then that could lead the way.
But you know, Rochelle, there's an awareness issue, and I think conferences like this can set the table. We are bad in rural school districts. We're bad in suburban, urban, wealthy, middle, and poor.
Yeah.
I mean, but everybody's doing this.
I hope everybody heard that.
But everybody's doing this not in my backyard thing. Well, I live in, you know, pick somewhere.
Yeah.
And my schools are really good. But relative to another state in a wealthy area, or relative to another state, we are bad. And so that's part of the issue. It's like, well, it's like not in my backyard, right? Or this is only a Flint, Pontiac, Detroit problem. It is not. It is a statewide issue, and we need to get that awareness raised. Just, you know, it's not just an urban problem in this state of Michigan.
You know,
it's not.
I clearly agree with that. But, you know, I think of when I came to Detroit 12 or 13 years ago, and the narrative around Detroit was so powerful that no matter what you sort of held up by way of counterexample, people dismissed it and marginalized it. I think the Detroit Public Schools is sort of fighting that a little bit too. And I think someone like Dr. Vitti is exactly the kind of leader who is going to put a number of proof points in the ground. He already has a bunch. I mean, there's no question that there is excellence in the Detroit Public Schools as we talk. But if he can do a number of these sort of breakout strategies that really sort of change people's mindset around the city and around the public education system in the city, it doesn't take much to sort of flip the script. And I think we've seen that, as at least I've seen it as I go across the country talking about Detroit. The narrative is completely different from where it was a decade ago. That took a lot of things, a lot of proof points. But I see, and I don't mean to hold you up on a pedestal, Dr. Vitti, but I see the potential for an enormous sort of breakthrough in how people think about the Detroit system. And I think because we can do it in Detroit and because we can sort of cast a new path in Detroit, I think it will make it clearer to people that these are other communities are in the same boat. We can kind of come at it in a similar way. But you need some of the kind of bold leadership that we've seen. I think it's almost impossible to overstate how important this Marygrove move is. This medical model applied to teacher training hasn't been tried anywhere in the United States. And you have in the University of Michigan and Dean Moji at the School of Education, one of the finest administrators anywhere. And working with a superintendent of this quality, with the willingness to sort of bend some rules, try some things, bring a whole different level of commitment to teacher training onto campus, I think it's going to be one of those proof points that people are really going to pay attention to.
I sure hope so.
Just to clarify, when he says break rules, he's talking about he's talking about fighting through bureaucracy. No actual laws are being broken. We don't need the next set of investigators in the truck. We're good.
Well said. We'll take that point. Lejeune, I was glad that you said what you said about higher education and its need, because it's always amazing to me. Years ago, Lieutenant Governor Cherry did a report on the rising cost of remedial education for kids coming to college. It was one of the most important things I had read in a decade, and people looked at it and said, oh, that's interesting, and didn't really do anything about it. So it has to be something that people embrace all the way down. And I also want to say, I talked to a 20-something-year-old woman who was so excited that she got a job, but she couldn't take it because the amount of money that she would make meant that she would lose the state-supported child care, and she couldn't afford the child care. That's what we're talking about. So, please.
So it seems like a bit of a tangent, but when you talked about becoming a teacher, and obviously you're in a place where you're doing other things to make change, but what you described about why you wouldn't be a teacher is what so many other people are saying why they leave the profession or why they won't go into the profession. We are in a state of crisis on that point. If you can't get the best and brightest or anyone to go into the classroom because of the conditions that exist, because of either lack of pay, lack of overall support, that is a crisis unlike any other best defined in the K-12 space. There's no employee that is more important in the K-12 space than a teacher. And so, so what are we doing? And we know this, and you know this. Other countries are much more advanced with being intentional about recruiting the best and the brightest on the undergraduate level to become teachers. The right kind of training, the right kind of transition from college to the workplace, accelerating salary, where not only is the country saying that this is the most important profession, but pay is consistent with that. And no district individually can address the teacher pay issue. That has to be, that's a macro challenge, not a micro challenge. We talk about teacher pay in a micro, meaning individual districts. That is a macro issue for the state of Michigan, and even a larger macro issue for the country. And at the federal level, there is absolutely no conversation right now around teacher quality or how to improve teacher quality and pathway. At the state level, it's minimal. And that has to be addressed at the macro level, and then the micro can benefit from that and then create alignment for that work. But that has to change if we're going to get K-12 education right.
Absolutely.
Because it is about the person in front of those children.
That's right.
We can all think of the best teacher that we ever had, and then now scale that teacher from kindergarten to 12th grade and imagine what children can do in reading, math, science, social studies, and the electives.
Absolutely. That's
the scale that we have to be talking about. They're out there. We just have to find the right mechanism to recruit and retain them.
Well, this is the point where I want to talk about one of the things that will help teachers, because, of course, not only are they moms and nutritionists and shoppers, because they have to provide coats for kids who don't show up and food for kids who haven't eaten, but teachers have to do so much, and I'm so proud to be here for you all to talk about something that you're going to do to help, because we've spent some time talking about it. So, Rick, I can tell you, we've known for years what Kresge and Kellogg do, and PNC in recent years, thanks to you, has stepped up in big ways to start focusing on that alignment between community and childhood. We have to stop seeing school districts and see kids. So can you talk a little bit about that focus and trying to make sure they're better aligned, and what PNC might be thinking about?
We were talking earlier about ground up, not top down. And what I'm really excited about the work that Kresge and Kellogg are doing is we're going into early child care providers and not being prescriptive. It could be an in-home provider. It could be something, I need a physical thing like a new roof, or I need that, or it could be professional development. How do I get a state grant? How do I get an insurance policy? It's not just some of the obvious things, but so we are teaming up with Kellogg and Kresge today, and we're announcing a $2.5 million grant between the three of us to invest in early learning spaces. Basically, this will be administered by IFF, and basically it's up to a $50,000 grant per grantee. And it could be, like I said, lots of different things. In Brightmoor, that might be a lot different than maybe in Cody Rouge. But we're using the model at Marygrove for this. I terrorize my staff because I have this mania about second and third shift daycare providers, or the lack thereof. So it could be something like that. I don't think a lot of people think, they think in the context, well, I'm 9 to 5. So that's where all the daycare, well, what about the person working second shift? He or she's working 2 jobs. Show me where those are. And so it could be something like that. But I'm really excited about it's what the different neighborhoods need. I think it's consistent with the mayor's program in the neighborhoods. And we didn't invent this. We're just basically trying to take what they've laid the groundwork from and expand upon it. I am fortunate to be on the advisory board of Hope Starts Here with these 2 great individuals. So we thought, how can we be involved? This is really true to our mission, and so we're excited about that. And so
That's
we're
fantastic.
announcing it today.
And for my friends in the media and those who are at companies or other associations who want to do the same thing, there are press releases outside so that you can read more about this amazing $2.5 million grant to give parents what they need so their children can do better. So thank you so much, the 3 of you, for that. That is awesome. I could read more, but I'm gonna let you guys read it because I know that you may have some questions, and I want to make sure that we get to the Q&A part because, you know, I'm not the only one who can do that, and we've got them here. So if you have a question, if you could, let me put my glasses on. If you could stand, just because it's easier for people to hear you, and just say who you are really quickly. If you have a comment, talk to me afterwards. But if you have a question, yes, right here in the red.
I want to make 4 points.
No. Gotta have a question. Yes, please.
Okay. The question is,
Here comes
Oh,
Shemai.
oh, she's bringing you the mic. Thank you. Cats, we want to get a lot of people in. Thank you.
the question is, what can we do to get graphing calculators into the poor school districts of Michigan? I have adopted the Mumford Marygrove School. I have determined that there are only 30 graphing calculators that are budgeted for 120 students. I know you have done everything you could. I have looked at the numbers. I'm a CPA. And so I have decided to provide the calculators for the 120 students. In the process of doing that, I have discovered that music isn't there. So I have worked with the music hall, just got approval from your principal to go out and fundraise for the music program. 40% of Michigan engineers are music students. The students need that music to be able to have a buffer on all the negative that's going on.
You're absolutely right. I'm going to let Dr. Vitti answer the music question. But you said, how can we get graphing calculators to these schools? How many schools do you have?
100.
Okay, so how many businesses are there in Southeast Michigan? Literally. If every person would literally adopt a school, do the graphing calculators, I mean, that is not rocket science. No, I know. I remember when my daughter had to get a graphing calculator, and I thought, what the hell? and that was a long time ago.
Well, what if you buy one and they lose it? You have to buy it.
Oh, then you have to buy another one. Yes. So then it was what the hell twice. But I'm we got to go to some other questions. But I'm very serious. Oh, wait. Are you raising your hand to buy graphing calculators? No. Okay. Well, then hold on 1 second, because I do want Dr. Vitti to just speak very briefly to arts and music, because that is now my new purview, which I'm very excited about, and things are happening.
Well, the school board and myself made a commitment to restoring the arts in the school district. It's one of our our key initiatives under our strategic plan linked to the whole child. So last year, when we had the first year to restructure the budget, we invested so that every school could have a music or an art program across the entire district. We've hired over the last year over 80 music and art teachers for the school district. We also initiated something called the Cultural Passport Program. And so all students beginning in kindergarten through 5th grade go to at least 3 cultural experiences in Detroit. And our vision is that this year's kindergartners, by the time they go into 5th grade, will experience everything that Detroit has to offer, from the symphonies to the music hall to Detroit Institute of Arts. And so we pay through that, for that through Title I. So we have a lot of other initiatives linked to the arts, but do know that we're at least laying the foundation and trying to build from there into the future. I agree with your point on the graphic calculators. We almost budgeted that this year and did not, because in actuality, the reason why we didn't was because the sequence of math courses right now has not been built so that students can actually use those calculators at scale and know how to use them. There are only certain students at certain schools that have been in a pathway to do that. And so in the coming years, as we restructured our curriculum in a sequence, 9th graders will be able to use those in the coming years. They just didn't have the right sequence of courses to do that. So we have new curriculum next year at the high school level aligned to the standards, and the sequence of classes will now allow students to actually have the capacity and the skill base to use those graphic calculators.
But let me thank you, and I hope the audience will thank you for what you're doing at that one school, because that is what it takes for people to step up and actually do it. So thank you. We have a question in the back.
Good morning, Rochelle. Bob Shaner from Rochester Community Schools. Maybe you could speak just for a little bit about the importance of the weighted formula that the governor's proposed in her budget.
Yeah,
You don't want me to do, oh.
Yeah, so I think the governor's budget is a first step in addressing inequity in schools or among school districts. Certainly Detroit would benefit from the governor's budget, and I am thankful. It is a first step, though, and I would say it just begins the conversation and the momentum into equity. So the way that the governor's budget is structured, it doesn't actually move to a weighted student formula, and I'm just going to be upfront about that. It provides extra funding for children that are considered at risk, which is helpful, but it doesn't actually revolutionize the funding structure. And that has to be addressed. The other big challenge that we have to address from a legacy point of view is local funding. So what we have not addressed is that every school district can tax at a certain level, and inequity is created based on property values. So even as the state provides what on the surface is equal funding, the state does that. The inequity comes from local property tax values. And so you can tax less and generate more, or tax more and generate more because of the property values. If that's not addressed, you'll never have equal funding. The only way you'll have equal funding is if you excessively fund a weighted student formula. I don't know if the legislature will ever move in that direction, so you have to address the local property taxes. I am supportive of the governor's budget. I am thankful for the governor's budget, but I also want to be honest for our students and say it's not enough. I recognize it's a good step in the right direction, but it's not going to create equity.
Yes.
My name is Nancy Welber, and I see you have lots of great sponsors up above your heads. One of them is the MEDC, and for years, that's the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. And for years, I've been saying that we need many more social workers in the state, but in addition to teachers, how do we get the MEDC involved in creating economic development through recruiting more outstanding social workers and teachers and encouraging people to go into those professions?
I think
Yes.
I have a case for you. I was in, don't ask me why, but in Roscommon County, and I was talking to somebody that's married to a caseworker. And in Roscommon County, she had 620 cases. So, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm not sure the frequency of touch would be there with 620 clients, if you will. Just to give you an idea of some of the math behind it. But I just thought I'd interject that. I was stunned, to say the least, on that.
I spoke recently to the American Psychiatric Association on the issue of adverse childhood experiences and trauma-informed care. And what I was asking them to do as a profession is to step up and actually help to validate the importance of these early treatments and how impactful and traumatic it is for young people. But what we can look at as a way forward is if you look at how many police officers are now in school districts, all school districts, I think over 50% of every school in the nation has a police officer and several, but we don't have as many social workers. If we could take some of those resources, and there's a new campaign going out around the nation that was started by Dr. Shervington in New Orleans, and it's called SAD, Not Bad. And that's what we're dealing with our children. And instead of being focused on their needs and understanding the social and emotional aspects of development, we're treating them as bad. And we're sending them directly on a pathway that isn't productive for our state, that doesn't create the kind of wealth in our state for the property values to grow so that we can invest in our children. So, you know, at the end of the day, you get what you pay for. And if we start investing in our children to become the workforce of the future, that's what we'll get. And that's what we're encouraging through Hope Starts Here. We have a framework. The framework not only is working well for the effort that we have, and I do want to thank our stewardship board. We have a stewardship board that helped shape the framework, and they were very vigilant. They told us, don't invite us to another meeting where all you want to do is talk. And they're very emphatic about that. So we get work done. We do have a framework. And what we have to do is use this framework to have the conversations with everyone involved in educating and investing in our children. And I think there's a lot of momentum happening. I want to thank the Fisher Foundation. The Fisher Foundation is at the table as well. And recently, in an expression of total alignment, adopted the Hope Starts Here framework for their entire early childhood development programmatic efforts. But that's the kind of alignment we need to have around the state, regardless of if you're at the table, but how do we come together and do something very different to invest in our young people, because we know when you do that, they succeed.
You know, Dr. Vitti, before we got up on the stage, said we all have to be careful not to sort of default back to the sort of the silver bullet issue. And I think the question about social workers and social supports for young people is just a perfect example. Even if you're dealing with 0 to 5 and not the full spectrum of youth, this is complicated stuff. You need facilities, you need social supports, you need transit, you need better wages. I mean, it's very complicated. And I think one of the values of having a framework, which can sound wonky, is that it at least is an attempt to put our arms around the totality of some of these challenges and opportunities. And so we can start with some money for providers to upgrade their facilities, but you've got to figure out a way to do certification. You've got to figure out a way to do wraparound services. You've got to figure out a way to get people from here to there. You've got to figure out a way to make sure their housing is stable. It becomes a sort of an exercise of collective action that is as difficult as it is important.
The way I think about this social worker, and then I think Lejeune said it really well, is the police versus social worker funding is kind of I think the social worker is innocent until guilty. The other approach seems to be, we're assuming these children are bad, or their parents or their care providers. And if we could just realign that thinking, I really think we could be onto something.
We have 2 more questions. We'll go here first, and then let's try to get somebody in the back. Yes.
Good morning. Charlotte Beversdorf with Merit Network. My question is addressing the digital divide any part of this initiative?
So we've put a stake in the ground in that. At the end of this next school year, all of our Ks will be one-to-one. We'll have a laptop for every student, and then we're going to start moving to the high school level the following year. All of our core classrooms will have interactive TV monitors, smaller than that, but similar in structure. So our kids can come up and touch, especially our younger children, touch and manipulate for better understanding. So we're starting to make those investments in DPSCD. All of our schools are now wireless, so we're slowly
I'm sorry,
making...
did you say all the schools are wireless?
Mm-hmm. We're moving in that direction, and then the next phase is starting to integrate the curriculum more with those devices. But at least now we're using it for a lot of our blended learning and just extra support in literacy and math.
And back when I was a journalist and we couldn't advocate for things, we would have to, I know that sounds so weird, we would have to ask questions. So I went to speak at a school and the principal mentioned that they didn't have enough computers. So I called up John Ricolta and said, did you know this school didn't have enough computers? And they sent over 50 computers. Anybody can do that. So I just want to make sure I point that out.
We just want them to buy the
Yeah,
right
talk to him about what to get, but anybody can do that. Let's get a question in the back, and then we're out of time. Never mind. We can't. I'm so sorry. We wanted to get to you. Please thank our panel.
Thank you.